All right, on today's show, could Heat Sixers already be over after just one game? We'll tell you why that might not be that crazy coming up next.
Are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to a live edition of Locked On Heat, your daily podcast covering all things Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. However, you may be joining us, YouTube, Odyssey, or you're on your favorite podcast app or tuning in live, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. And David, I don't want to get too ahead of myself, and at the risk of pissing off Sixers fans and the basketball gods after game one, I think this series might already be over. Now, I'm not all the way there yet, okay?
Wow.
But I'm having a harder time finding a reason why Philly can hang with the Heat rather than why this might just be a done deal already. And the number one reason for that is because of Joel Embiid's injury, of course, right? The orbital bone fracture, the concussion, not to mention the right thumb ligament injury that he's been dealing with already. He's already ruled out for game two. Sixers fans are hopeful that he'll return in game three, but the verbiage around his injury is not changed. It's still indefinite,
Right.
which does not sound good. And even if he does come back, he's going to be wearing a mask. He's not going to be, he's banged up. He's like, all of his body parts are basically coming off or fractured at this point. And so you can't imagine that he'll be at his MVP level even when he does return. So that's the number one reason. The number two reason is that James Harden just doesn't look right. He hasn't all season long. And we're getting to we're at the point now, and I think we've been at this point for a while where this is sort of the rule and not the exception. It's not like we could all of a sudden wonder, just expect for James Harden to just be back to being like Houston Rockets circa 2018 James Harden. That's just not who he is, and he hasn't been that for a couple of years now. Tobias Harris got a bunch of shots. He's going to get a bunch of shots in this series, but he's not that guy, right? He's not winning you 4 games in a series. And, you take Embiid out of the mix, and even Tyrese Maxey isn't as terrifying as he is when he's playing like third banana next to Embiid and James Harden. He's just not that guy right now. And the Sixers have no answers for the Heat defensively, which we got into in our recap last night. You could say that Philly didn't shoot well, right? But you could also say that the Heat didn't shoot well, and the Heat didn't have Kyle Lowry, and they didn't have Jimmy Butler either. The Heat are going to play better, and I have to imagine that the Sixers will play better than they did in Game 1. But I don't know that there are any reasons to believe right now in Philadelphia being able to make this a series.
I think they were always going to be underdogs, especially now with the Embiid injury. But the Embiid injury looming over this series and his potential return, I think, is what still gives them a possibility. A slim one, but I think it's a possibility. He is good. And Miami, though they defend him well, and Bam Adebayo in particular defends him well, I think he can change a series. Because all it takes is that kind of momentum shift where they go back to Philadelphia and all of a sudden he has his big game. He starts drawing those flop-ass fouls and the energy shifts. The refereeing goes a little different. The officiating starts siding to them. And then we already saw that with James Harden yesterday where he can still get those calls. If Tobias Harris can keep it going, if Tyrese Maxey builds off that energy, I think it gives them a possibility. In a world, if he comes back at close to whatever strength he's going to be at, I can't say I put a number on it because you're right. He does have the thumb injury. He will be wearing a mask for sure. But when he comes back, and if he's effective, they could win a game. They could win even 2 games in there, and then all of a sudden that changes things. I don't think it's likely, and I think the big reason is, as you mentioned, the fact that Miami did not play their best game in Game 1. They were far from it. They had struggles across the board, and with the exception of 3 or 4 players, Gabe Vincent, PJ Tucker, Bam Adebayo, and Tyler Herro specifically, Miami struggled. Max Strus was not particularly good. Victor Oladipo wasn't good. Jimmy Butler, who had been so great in the Atlanta Hawks series, was not good. So considering all that, Miami has another level to reach, and their level is significantly higher than Philadelphia's. If Miami is clicking in all cylinders, they are a much better team than Philadelphia, and I think that's pretty apparent. And I think even with Embiid, Miami is still a much more dangerous team.
Look, the Joel Embiid part of this, we just can't escape it, right? And he is it goes without saying how important he is to the Sixers. But here's just some numbers to back it up, because it felt like Miami got flustered by Philadelphia's zone in that first half, but something clicked for them in that second half, specifically with the Tyler Herro and Bam Adebayo partnership, their two-man game. They just basically pick and rolled Philadelphia's defense to death. And if that is the code to crack that zone, right?
Yeah.
Then I really don't know what answers Philadelphia has as long as Embiid is out. Here are some numbers here. The Philadelphia's defensive rating with Joel Embiid on the floor is very good. Has been during the playoffs, has been during the regular season. Without Joel Embiid, since the trade deadline, right? So ever since they basically flipped around the roster, DeAndre Jordan and Paul Millsap are their back, and Paul Reed are their backup centers instead of whatever was going on before. Their defensive rating without Joel Embiid since making these changes to their roster, 116.9 points per 100 possessions. That's the worst in the NBA. It's the worst in the NBA. And you had to play Joel Embiid 36 minutes a night just to keep your defense above water. And obviously, and by the way, he had to play 36 plus minutes. He had to play 37 minutes, 44 minutes, 39 minutes, 40 minutes, and then 36 minutes in the blowout closeout game against Toronto in the first round, just to get past the Raptors. Right. And it was probably it was about 4 minutes
Doc Rivers
too long.
in Game 6. Yeah.
It was
Absolutely.
And now you're getting 0 minutes of Joel Embiid, which means you're getting 48 minutes of the worst defense in the NBA by net rating.
Yeah.
I don't know. And I know that Doc Rivers is getting a bunch of crap for playing DeAndre Jordan and saying, I'm going to play DeAndre Jordan whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
And I understand the criticism, but I'll push back on it. What's the better option? I don't know what the better option is. It's not Paul Millsap. It's not. I understand every Sixers fan wants B-ball Paul Reed in there, but he picks up like 5 fouls every 2 minutes. He can't, when Doc Rivers says he'll foul out if I start him, he's right about that. I don't Charles Bassey. Who do you know who that is? What's the better option? I don't know what the better option is. And that's that's more of a criticism of the roster than it is Doc Rivers, because that's just what he's got. That's just what he's got. And so they had a little success with playing Niang at the 5 and stuff like that, but you just can't do that for 48 minutes without Joel Embiid in there. You just can't.
Is Tobias Harris at the 5 a possibility?
You can't do it for 48 minutes. It's the same thing, Tobias Harris / Niang at the 5.
I see. To me, I think Paul Reed starting might be a better option, just to kind of set the tone. You don't want to start giving Miami that edge. Again, I mean, none of this matters, and who knows what Doc Rivers will decide. He's pretty consistent. But at the same time, you can put DJ in there when Dedmon is on the floor, because now you have two older centers, neither of whom are particularly athletic. I still think Dedmon's a significantly player than DeAndre Jordan at this point in his career. But I think that's a possibility that you can kind of throw Millsap and Niang in there, especially when Miami goes with those small ball lineups.
Okay, good luck with that. Good luck with that if you're Philly. You're grasping at straws here. I think to your point, it's a whole lot of bad options if you're Doc Rivers. This is why Bam Adebayo had his best game of the playoffs, right? Is because it was all right, cool. You're going to put DeAndre Jordan in front of me? Great, thanks. Oh, you're going to put Paul Reed in front of me? Great, thanks. You're going to put Niang in there at the 5? Cool. I'll just attack him too. It doesn't matter whoever they put in there. And so that's my greater point is, as long as Joel Embiid's out, there is no answers. Let's say Joel Embiid does return for Game 3. You're probably already down 2-0. You've got to win 4 straight games. I'm not saying that the Heat are going to sweep the Sixers. That is not what I'm saying here. Even if Joel Embiid had been healthy for this series, I think most pundits would have said, okay, Heat or Sixers in 7, right? So you just give now Miami a 2-game handicap essentially in this series. How does Philly come back? How does Philly come back and win 4 of 5? I just don't really see how that's viable. No,
the X
especially
factor,
considering that Embiid won't be 100%. There is no way that he can be.
The X factor here is Kyle Lowry. Gabe Vincent had a solid game, but he also struggled offensively for most of his playing time. Lowry being out for Game 2, and it was reported at practice today that he will be out for Game 2, so that is official. That's a concern, because his defense, his leadership, his timely shooting, which has been at an incredible level for the past month and a half or so, is absolutely a necessity out there. And so with him out for the next game, potentially for Game 3, that gives Philadelphia an edge, a slight one. And then, of course, there's always the sword of Damocles hanging over every NBA team at this stage in the playoffs, which is the potential for injury. We saw Jimmy Butler clutching at his wrist. We know that there was something there. There's been a lingering injury for him for practically the 3 seasons that he's been with the Miami Heat. And I think we're going to continue to see that. I mean, if he struggles or if he undergoes some kind of severe injury, that's a potential, danger for Miami. Now, the strength, however, is in Miami's depth. The fact that when a Lowry goes out, a Gabe Vincent steps up. Nobody on Philadelphia's roster can do the equivalent there. And if not Gabe Vincent, then somebody else. Then Bam Adebayo, then Tyler Herro. And again, these are much better players. They're top heavy. Miami's deeper. They have more talent. And of course, now we're starting to see the resurgence of Victor Oladipo providing an incredible boost for Miami. And although he did not play particularly well in game 1, I would expect him to have a significant impact throughout the series.
Well, it's not all hope is not lost for the 76ers, at least if you ask one Paul Reed. We'll talk about his bold statements next, but first, David, tell listeners about Built Bar.
Well, summer is coming. It's right around the corner. I mean, in Miami, it's practically summer already. You're going to need some food on the go, and Built Bars are the perfect snack to take with you on family vacations. You can throw them in your bag. You can throw them in your kids' backpacks when they're out to summer camp. Make sure that everyone has a bar so you're fueled for your summer adventures. So many great flavors to choose from. If you haven't tried the Built Bars or their puffs, they're all covered in 100% chocolate. They're soft, easy to chew, no chalky taste, and all the nutrients that you might be looking for in a protein bar. You can get a mixed box with all of your favorites, and believe me, you won't be disappointed. We've been talking about them for a long, long time now. If you haven't tried them by now, make sure to go and get them. But the only way you can do that is by going to Built.com. And best of all, if you use the promo code LOCK15, you get 15% off your next order of Built Bars. So go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCK15, and you get 15% off at Built.com.
Thank you so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. If you haven't checked out our recap breaking down everything from Game 1 immediately after the game, check that out on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Also, make sure to check out Locked On NBA Big Board. Host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and the author of the NBA Big Board newsletter is joined by Richard Stamen, Sam Ferris, and Leif Thulin, giving fans an in-depth look into the NBA draft, mock draft, player rankings, and, of course, big boards. It's free. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Mr. Paul Reed, let's get to this because we teased it in that recap. Some fighting words, David. Some fighting words after the game. Here's Paul Reed's quote. "We can beat this team if we keep them on their heels. They're going to fold. We have the offense. The only thing we have to worry about is locking them down every possession and getting out in transition. If we do that, they can't stop us." David, your thoughts?
Well, I'm seeing the transcription here from the Heat PR staff that sent us out after yesterday's game. And this is something that you wouldn't include in the quote that you wrote. We can go out there and be more physical than them and play more aggressive and then keep them on their heels, etc. Like, who amongst you, Paul? I mean, who is going to step up? I mean, Paul Millsap, I'm a big fan of Millsap's, and yet I don't think he can do it anymore. DJ certainly can't do it. Is it Tyrese Maxey, who's not a particularly good defender? Very fast. He's not going to be physical. James Harden? Absolutely not. Is it George Niang? Is he your savior on defense? Is he going to be the one who gets more physical and challenges some of the Heat offensive players there? Because I don't see it. I just look. I think it is so ridiculous for this second-year player who's averaged like 5 minutes a game, and of those 5 minutes, 4 of them are spent picking up fouls. I just don't understand where he gets off offering this kind of feedback. Like, you have to stay. Again, he was asked a specific question. What are your positives from game 1? And his positive was, I think we can beat this team. It's like you were down 21 points midway through the fourth quarter before Doc sent all the scrubs in, and you're talking like this was a game that you could have easily had. And I've seen Sixers fans come on and say this similarly where, we were up 1 at the half. It's like, yeah, dude, it's only the half. Like that's only, 24 minutes of the game. There's another 24 minutes to be played. And during those 24 minutes, Miami had complete control. So Paul Reed and Sixers fans are both equally delusional.
Miami had complete control in the first quarter too. It was really just the second quarter.
Yeah. When they went small ball and then they had that zone defense there, It worked pretty well. I just look, I understand Paul as a player. You're trying to stay confident. You're trying to offer something, again, positive feedback, which is what he was asked. But this is This is ridiculous. And I also saw some people saying, "Oh, is this bulletin board material?" No, the Heat don't need this. The Heat don't need that as bulletin board material. He's not really a factor.
They're laughing at this. I don't know that they put this on the bulletin board because they would just be too busy. Like, they would be doubled over laughing. They would probably lose if they put this on the bulletin board because they couldn't focus. They would be laughing too hard. Like, they couldn't even get out onto the court. This is crazy that Paul Reed said that. And look, yeah, he was asked a question. He wasn't asked the question wasn't, "Hey, Paul Reed, would you care to offer a ridiculously bold prediction about the series right now?"
He doubled down on it. He was asked another question on the most disappointing factor from tonight's loss, and the quote here is, "The most disappointing part is that we were up at the half, and we can really beat this team. The whole team knew it. For me, it's staying in foul trouble and not being on the court." It's like, yeah, that's why you're not a factor, guy. I mean, like, no offense, you're a fine NBA player. You're an NBA player. That means you're a heck of an athlete. We know that. But I mean, you played 10 minutes and you were picking up.
It's a lot of coulda, woulda, shoulda. If Paul Reed saying, "Hey, if I just stay out of foul trouble, we're golden," it's okay. First of all right, you're Paul Reed. You're not Joel Embiid. Okay, like Paul Reed, you're a fine player. I like Paul Reed as a player. His problem is fouling, and it wasn't just in game one. It's his entire career. That doesn't just magically go away against a really physical team like Miami, especially. And then the like that other statement he made about, if we just get stops consistently. Okay. I gave you the stat in the first segment, dude. 116.9 points per 100 possessions. That's what you're giving up without your only good defender, Joel Embiid. Apologies to Matisse Thybulle. Your best defender and Joel Embiid, your most impactful one. Without Joel Embiid, you can't stop anybody, and that's not just in game one. That's your stat since the trade deadline, dude. So all these things, it's like it kind of sounds like he's talking about a different basketball team. Like, what basketball team do you think you play for, Paul Reed? Now, we might come off as like super pompous and confident right now, and that might, like, if the Sixers just somehow miraculously go on to win this series, we might look like jackasses. But that's just going to be playing the results, because him saying this is bananas. It's absolutely crazy, and it's a lack of self-awareness. And this is why, his veterans probably afterwards in the locker room were like, dude, come on. That's why, like, Kevin Durant came in. Who did Kevin Durant say that about? Like Bruce Brown or something? He was like Bruce Brown was just offering this kind of stuff in a postgame. Kevin Durant was like, "Yo, we don't need to be talking like that." Like, James Harden's thinking probably in his head, "Yo, we don't need to be talking like that."
And that's what it comes down to, right? This is on Harden. Like, you're gonna see some up and down performances from Tobias at some point. Maxey might have a better game than he did in game one, but nobody else is really going to be able to take a leap aside from Harden. It comes down to him, and he has to do it in game two. So that's the only possibility that Philadelphia really has of making this a much more difficult process for Miami. He has to step up. If they can somehow find a way, again, he has to go supernova and it just explode in game two. And if he can do that, gives them that edge, the possibility where they could steal that game, then yes, again, with the return of Embiid, lots of things can start to snowball. A potential looming other injury for Miami. Those are realistic factors. I just don't see it happening. Like, we got to the point where we've seen Harden for several years not be as impactful. He just hasn't been that kind of player.
Yeah, and that's, again, it kind of goes back to my greater point here is I don't want to be the guy who overreacts to game one, right? And just say, series is over, pack it in. I'm having a harder time finding a reason not to say that than to avoid it, other than the fact that I just don't want to overreact to one game, right? And look, James Harden, that could end up being his worst game of this series. And I went back and looked at it, and it wasn't even as bad, right? He had 16 points on 5 for 13 shooting and 5 assists, but his teammates missed a bunch of shots. That could have easily been a double-double game for James Harden, right? If his teammates made a few more shots. He's playing the point guard role. I know this is a game where people are like, okay, James Harden, you need to be the scorer, you need to take over, but he's not going to score 120 points. He does need to get guys involved, right? And so I think I thought he actually managed the game pretty well, all things considered, but he didn't really get to the free throw line very much. He took the third just the third most shots on his team. Tyrese Maxey took more. Tobias Harris took the most. So he's going to have to amp that up at some point. But this could end up being the worst Harden game of this series. But still, I'm with you. Like, okay, I haven't really seen a reason to really believe that over the last couple of years. So, all that said, there's a couple more things we want to get into about this game. We've got a bunch of questions here in the live chat that we'll get to. Also, Duncan Robinson did not
Yeah.
appear in game one. Let's discuss that next segment here on Locked On Heat. Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. You can find us on Twitter at Locked On Heat. Email us lockedonheat@gmail.com. And thank you to everyone tuning in live here on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. We'll get to your questions here in a minute. But Duncan Robinson was a DNP CD in game one, to the shock of many people. I've heard a lot of takes about the reasoning behind this, David. And the reason is quite simple. You don't want to give Philadelphia multiple points to attack defensively. It had nothing to do with Duncan Robinson being a good shooter or a bad shooter. It didn't have anything to do with that, other than you look at the role players on this roster: Gabe Vincent, Max Strus, who's a starter now, Caleb Martin, Victor Oladipo. They're all better defenders than Duncan Robinson, and I think you just wanted to eliminate that opportunity for somebody like James Harden or Tyrese Maxey or Tobias Harris to attack that player. When it's just Tyler Herro, it's much easier to manage, and we saw the Heat manage that specifically in the second half. That becomes so much harder to manage if there's two guys out there, and now you've got three defenders making up for two guys, as opposed to four defenders making up for one. That said, I do wonder if there is a path to Duncan Robinson playing in this series, and I do wonder, after all of the questions and all of these things, if we see him a little bit in game two, specifically in those moments where James Harden is not on the court. I think there might be a pocket of the game where you could get Duncan Robinson out there, even with Tyler Herro, and not worry about it because Harden's not out there attacking those mismatches. What do you think?
I think so. My only concern, aside from, again, the defensive weaknesses, and they're not that glaring, but he's a little foul prone. He's going to get attacked. At the same time, Miami's offense has to shift a little bit whenever he's out on the floor. They're running those dribble handoffs. Who is he going to play alongside? Is he going to be playing alongside Bam? Is that going to take away from Bam's aggressiveness because he's trying to get Duncan going by operating more at the top of the key, running those DHOs? That's a possibility. Can he be out on the perimeter and take away some of the space that we've seen, Victor Oladipo or Tyler Herro occupy, especially when they go with that zone? We saw Herro thrive in that. Is he going to be able to play alongside those two guys and still be a factor? And you're right. It's the limited aspect of what Duncan can currently bring to the table that makes him a liability out there is that he's not initiating offense for others. He's not going to be the aggressive defender that Oladipo is. And you can say whatever you want to about his offense, but Tyler Herro is much more versatile as a scorer. So I think there's certainly a logic to what Spo does, but I think we could see him play there. I'd like to see him out on the floor because I think he's going to be necessary at some point. Like, he's going to be a factor if and when Miami moves on from this series. He's going to be a factor in the next one, and you want to be able to bring him out on the floor. And I think that's why you want to continue to build confidence. Like, Spo keeps saying that he's stable enough to handle this sort of adversity or change and things of that sort. I don't know. I think any player wants to be on the floor. Duncan can, revel in the fact that he's got paid a lot of money, but that that's not enough for him. Like, I think when you get to the NBA, it's not just about collecting them checks. You want to be a factor. You want to be a player. You want to be able to go out there and make a positive impact for your team. So I'd like to see him get out there, have a spurt where he could have 10 quick points or something like that, buoy his confidence a little bit, and then carry that over into the next series.
Look, that would be nice. I don't think that's what I don't think it's at the top of Spo's priority list.
Absolutely
is making
not.
sure you do have to say, like, hey, Duncan, and part of him Spo saying this in public, Duncan is this and that, he's so confident and stable, is sort of talking up Duncan Robinson to the public and making Duncan believe it, right? And so that's fine. I do think that had this game been closer in the second half than it was, and Philly did make a little bit of a run there. It was very little, but had it gotten back to single digits, I think we would have seen Jimmy Butler again in that fourth quarter, and B, maybe have seen Duncan Robinson, because Miami shot 9 of 36 from 3-point range. I don't think they'll shoot that poorly again in this series, but if they do, if it feels like they need a jolt, I could see Spo going to Duncan Robinson. I don't think that Spo will go into game two being like, all right, here are my Duncan Robinson minutes. But I asked him about it today, and he said I don't remember. Somebody asked him, and he said everybody's on the table. Everybody's on the table. And that means, here's my plan, but I'm willing to veer away from that plan. Baby Rage writes in, thin mints are greater than Harden. And that got me thinking, should we start calling if Thin Mints are delicious,
Well,
and they
that's
are.
putting me. That's putting me in a really tight spot there. Like, I mean, both trash, so it's kind of hard to argue.
Well, then to you, maybe James Harden is Thick Mints.
I suppose you're
No?
right.
All right.
Yeah, I suppose you're right.
I gave it a try. Can't all be winners. All right, let's get to some listener questions here. Baby Rage asks, do you think this is a Tyler Herro series or a Bam Adebayo series? Baby Rage, I
Why
think
not
it's both
both?
a Tyler and
Why
a Bam
not both?
series.
Yeah.
It's a Herro and a Bam series. I wrote about this on my Substack today, broke down some of the numbers in the film and stuff like that, and just kind of outlined why that connection is so important in this series. And it mainly comes down to the fact that Tyler is an aggressor. You need that specifically in game one where Jimmy Butler wasn't playing up to his standard and Kyle Lowry was not playing at all. And you just needed somebody to sort of puncture that Philadelphia zone. And between Bam's athleticism and Tyler Herro's just, bag of moves and versatility on offense, that's exactly, I think that, the Atlanta series was a Jimmy Butler series. I think this series very much is going to be a Bam and Tyler series.
I will go a step further and say that I think it's much more likely that we'll continue to see Bam continue to be more impactful. Like Tyler, just by nature of his offensive repertoire, like that shot may not fall. It doesn't mean that he's off, or it doesn't mean that he's hurt or anything like that. It's just sometimes the shots don't fall, and that's just the reality of it. I don't think there's anything Philadelphia can do to defend him any better than they did in game one, but he just might not have that same kind of hot streak that he did in game one. But Bam, however, again, between the Bam, between Paul Reed, between everybody else, I think even with Joel Embiid out there, I think we've seen Bam be more aggressive in pass opportunities. I think he's going to have a bigger series. I think he realizes much more what's at stake right now. But you're right. Why not both? I think that's where I'm leaning as well. But if I had to say one or the other, I'd veer more towards Bam.
Yeah, I'm with you. Michael writes in, how often do you think Doc Rivers is going to use the zone defense in game two? It worked.
I hope that Philadelphia writers ask him about it all the time, just so he just says, you know what, you guys like the zone so much. Well, I'm not even going to go zone. Because that's the way Doc seems to be operating nowadays.
I can't get over the DeAndre Jordan quote in that whether you like it or not, the punctuation to be like, we're going to continue to play DeAndre Jordan. That could have been the sentence. That could have been it. But the fact that he punctuated that with whether you like it or not to the reporters is maybe my favorite media thing that's happened all season long.
Us against the world, and we're making these decisions whether you, the media, don't like it.
It's so contentious with the Philadelphia reporters.
I can't imagine a world if when Victor Oladipo wasn't playing and Ira Winterman was saying, hey, are you going to play Victor? He's like, no, we're not going to play Victor whether you want him to, Ira. Sorry, I can't imagine. I can't imagine a world where Spo is battling with these guys out there.
It's crazy. It's like every day now with Doc. It's crazy. I do think we'll see the zone defense only because you don't really have any other options. I'll say it again. 116.9 points per 100 possessions. That's their defensive rating without Joel Embiid. As long as they don't have Joel Embiid, I think they have to go to the zone. And I think you could talk yourself into it having worked, right? Because you look at it forces Miami to shoot. They did not shoot well in the first game. Again, I thought Tyler and Bam sort of cracked the code there in the second half, but you're looking at a lot of bad options if you're Doc Rivers, and the zone has not been the worst option for them. So yeah, I think we'll see it more.
Absolutely.
This one comes from Philippe. How did the Heat defend the step back? Were they jumping? What do you think?
I saw this from PJ Tucker in particular, and I think we keep kind of harping at it, but his familiarity with Harden's game, he kind of downplayed it in his post-game presser. He was like, "Oh, just experience in general, and yeah, sure, a little bit of playing alongside Shane. His moves. You know the way his body starts to twist and turn as he's ready to uncoil that shot." And I saw PJ just kind of be physical, kind of putting up a little bit of a wall in front of Harden, just making sure that he closes off that space, and then just being able to kind of again stay tough with him. Be physical, match that kind of physicality, because that's kind of the aspect of Harden's game that is overlooked by most fans. Is that yes, he gets to the line a lot, but a lot of that has to do with his just sheer physical strength. He is very strong. He gets his hands in there. He ties you up. He gets those arms twisted around you, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, you're in foul trouble. So I think PJ and his familiarity, and again, just a great overall number of defenders that this team has, were able to anticipate what he does. Whenever Harden started to pull the ball down, too, I think we saw a double, a triple. I think, there were some moments there. They were running really high screen and roll action for him, multiple screens, just to try and get him going. The shots didn't fall. I wonder whether or not they will in game 2. But I like the fact that PJ, in his familiarity with the way Harden's style of play, I think makes a huge difference for the Heat.
Eric Spoelstra had a great story today after practice talking about how Clemson head coach Dabo Swinney was at a recent game, and PJ's coming off the court, and the first guy, and Dabo's there in Championship Alley between the court and the locker room, and the first player that Dabo Swinney wanted to talk to was PJ Tucker. And that makes a lot of sense that a football coach would be in love with PJ Tucker because he plays basketball like it's a football game, right? Like, you don't want to see PJ Tucker on a football field. That would be terrible.
Or in a dark alley. Or in a dark alley.
That's right. So yeah, PJ has been awesome. That's why we gave the credit cookies to PJ, Bam, and Tyler. Is just PJ taking James Harden 94 feet, knowing how to defend him, knowing his tendencies and all of these things because they played together so long. He's been awesome in this series. I expect that to continue. Here's another thing that's going to continue. We've got a ton of questions in the live chat here. So if you are tuning in live, do not go away. What we're going to do right now is we're going to wrap this up for the audio portion that we're going to post onto our podcast feeds later. And then right after, we're going to get to more of these questions. So don't go away. But if you're listening to this on the podcast feed, then and not live, then we will have a part 2 coming, which is just more of us answering some of these great listener questions. Remember to like and subscribe Locked On Heat on YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts. Comment and leave a 5-star rating and reach us on Twitter at Locked On Heat. Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NBA. Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts.